The basement room is small, 10 paces by 12. The air is thick with dust and summer heat. It smells of damp mortar, of old wood, of nervous sweat. 11 people stand huddled together in the center. A man, a woman, 4 young daughters, a son, a doctor, 3 servants. They are told to wait. They are told a photograph is needed to prove they have not escaped. They arrange themselves obediently, the girls hiding jewels sewn into their garments. Footsteps echo on the wooden floor above. The waiting stretches, a tight wire in the stifling dark. Then, the door opens again. Not a photographer. 11 men enter. The door swings shut with a heavy, final sound. The man at the front, Yakov Yurovsky, a man with a steel beard and colder eyes, steps forward. He holds a piece of paper. He reads, his voice flat, cutting through the silence. In view of the fact that your relatives are continuing their attack on Soviet Russia, the Ural Executive Committee has decided to execute you. The words hang. Time fractures. The father, Nicholas Romanov, former Tsar of all Russia, turns his head, bewildered. What? He asks. What? The answer is the click of a revolver being cocked. The woman, Alexandra, has just enough time to make the sign of the cross. Then, the room erupts. 5 days earlier, the house known as the Ipatiev House in the Ural city of Yekaterinburg was quieter. It was a prison, dubbed the House of Special Purpose. Its windows were whitewashed, its lower floors barricaded. From the outside, it was a silent, solemn block. Inside, the routine was a fragile, borrowed normalcy. Nicholas Romanov, no longer Tsar, would read. His wife, Alexandra, would write in her diary, her faith in God unshaken even as the world crumbled. Their daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, would mend clothes, play cards, try to teach their little brother, Alexei, 13 but frail from hemophilia. They could hear the soldiers' boots on the floor above, the coarse laughter, the muttered insults. The smell of cheap tobacco and boiled cabbage drifted through the halls, a stark contrast to the perfume and beeswax of their former palaces. They were prisoners of the Bolshevik regime, a faction that had seized power in the storm of revolution. The Romanov dynasty, which had ruled Russia for over 3 centuries with an iron fist and a divine mandate, was now reduced to this, a family in a few small rooms under the watchful eyes of men who despised everything they represented. The world outside was a cauldron. Russia was in the throes of a brutal civil war. The Red Army, the Bolshevik forces, fought a collection of anti-communist white armies. And the Romanovs were the ultimate prize. For the whites, they were a symbol, a rallying point. For the Reds, they were a living threat, a beacon for monarchist restoration. In Moscow, Vladimir Lenin and his inner circle watched the white advance towards the Urals with growing alarm. The Romanovs in white hands would be a catastrophe. A decision, cold and political, was being weighed. It was not about crime and punishment. It was about eliminating a problem. In Yekaterinburg, the local Ural Soviet, more radical and desperate than even Moscow, reached their own conclusion. They would not let the bloody Nicholas be rescued. The commandant of the house, Yakov Yurovsky, a committed Bolshevik, began his preparations. He selected a squad of loyal men, a mix of Russians, Latvians, and Hungarians. He inspected their weapons. He gave them vodka, not enough to cloud judgment, but enough to steady nerves. He told them the order would come soon. The air in the guardroom grew tense, electric with a dreadful purpose. Back in the family's rooms, the atmosphere was different, but no less charged. They sensed the change. The guards became ruder, more withholding. The familiar faces were replaced with strangers. On July 16th, the family went to bed early. Alexandra wrote in her diary, "Grey morning, later lovely sunshine. Baby has a slight cold." All went to bed at 10:30, without dressing again, as Yurovsky had ordered. That word, ordered, carried a new weight. It was not a request. It was an instruction from a man who held the power of life and death. That night, The summer darkness over Yekaterinburg was unusually still. No birds sang. The only sounds were the pacing of sentries and the distant rumble of white artillery, growing closer with each hour. The wire of tension, stretched over months of captivity, was about to snap. Yurovsky received the final confirmation. The order was sanctioned from the highest level. There would be no trial, no spectacle, just an erasure. He finalized the plan. He would wake the family in the dead of night. He would tell them they were being moved for their own safety, due to the unrest in the city. He would take them to a secure room in the basement, a semi-cellar space with a low, timber-lined ceiling that would, he calculated, contain the noise and the mess. He sent men to prepare the room. They moved furniture. They rolled out a thick felt rug, ostensibly to protect the Tsarevich's fragile joints. In reality, it was to muffle sound and soak up liquid. They nailed a frame into the wall, claiming it was for a tarpaulin to protect against ricochets during any street fighting. It was a lie. The frame was to pin the victims in a tight killing zone. The stage was set. The players, both executioners and condemned, were moving toward their final positions, guided by the ruthless logic of history and fear. The Imperial Dynasty, which had begun with a ceremony in the very same Ipatiev monastery centuries before, would end in an Ipatiev House basement. The clock ticked past midnight. It was now July 17th, 1918. Yurovsky took a deep breath, adjusted his leather jacket, and walked down the corridor to knock on the Romanovs' door. The knock is firm, urgent. It is 1:30 a.m. The family, who retired in their clothes as instructed, are roused from a fitful sleep. Yurovsky's voice is clipped, impersonal. They must get up. They must dress. The city is unstable. The white forces are nearing. For their own safety, they are to be moved to a lower floor. There is a flurry of quiet activity in the dim lamplight. The girls help Alexei, who is in pain and cannot walk. Nicholas carries his son, the boy's thin arms wrapped around his father's neck. Alexandra, her face a mask of regal stoicism, follows. Behind them come Dr. Botkin, the loyal physician, Anna Demidova, the maid, the cook, Ivan Karatanov, and the footman, Alexei Trupp. They are a small, vulnerable procession in the hushed, shadowy house. They are led down a narrow staircase, then through a maze of doors, each one guarded by a silent, stone-faced man. The air grows cooler, damper. They are taken outside into the courtyard for a moment, the night air sharp, then led back inside through a different door, down another set of stairs into the basement. The journey is confusing, disorienting, a tactic to prevent them from understanding the layout, from hoping for escape. The room they enter is barren, with a single bulb in a wire cage casting a harsh, yellow light. A heavy wooden pillar stands in the middle. The windows are high, barred, and whitewashed. The maid, Anna Demidova, nervous, clutches a small pillow. Inside it, she has secreted a box of jewels, a last-ditch hope for bartering or bribing. She notices the felt rug, the odd, empty space. There aren't even chairs, she whispers. Where are we to sit? Nicholas, still holding Alexei, speaks to Yurovsky. Well, are there really none to be had? His voice is that of a man used to being obeyed, even in captivity. Yurovsky, his mind elsewhere, barks an order. 2 chairs are brought in. Alexandra takes one, sighing with the relief of her ailments. Nicholas gently places Alexei in the other. The rest stand behind them, a living portrait of resigned anxiety. They wait. Minutes crawl by. Alexandra glances at Nicholas. The daughters huddle together, their faces pale in the electric light. Alexei, barely awake, rests his head on his father's shoulder. They can hear Yurovsky speaking sharply to someone in the corridor, the sound of men assembling. The smell of fresh mortar mixes with the scent of their own fear. Then, the door opens fully. The execution squad files in. They are 12 in total now, a cramped press of bodies in the small space. The room feels suddenly airless. The men's faces are set, some looking at the floor, some with eyes burning with ideological fury. They carry an assortment of weapons: Mauser pistols, Colts, a Winchester rifle. The metal gleams dully. Yurovsky steps forward. He unfolds the paper. His reading of the death sentence is rapid, toneless. The words are a physical blow. Nicholas Romanov turns, his face a canvas of stunned disbelief. "What?" he says again, louder. He turns back to his family, as if to shield them with his body. It is the last act of the Tsar. Yurovsky draws his Mauser C96 semi-automatic pistol, aims directly at Nicholas' chest, and fires. The crack is immense in the confined space. Nicholas collapses to his knees, then forward onto the floor. A single, sharp cry rings out from the women. That shot is the signal. The room dissolves into chaos. The squad opens fire. The noise is deafening, a continuous, roaring thunder that shakes the timber walls. Acrid gunsmoke fills the air, stinging the eyes, clawing at the throat. The shooters, packed tightly, fire wildly, some aiming at pre-assigned targets, others simply blasting into the group. Alexandra, still seated, has time only to raise her hand to make the sign of the cross before a bullet from Yurovsky's second shot strikes her in the head. She slumps sideways. The daughters scream. Bullets rip into them. But they do not fall immediately. They stumble, spin, clutch at each other. The jewels sewn into their corsets, a secret treasury of diamonds, emeralds, and pearls intended for their survival, act as a crude, macabre armor. The bullets ricochet, whining off the gems, turning what was meant to be their salvation into a source of prolonged agony. The killers see the girls spinning, their bodies defying the gunfire, and a superstitious terror grips them. They are like unkillable dolls. The shooting becomes more frantic. Men switch from pistols to rifles, aiming at their heads, their legs. Dr. Botkin is cut down. The maid, Anna Demidova, drops her pillow and, in a state of pure terror, runs screaming along the wall until a bayonet thrust silences her. The cook and footman are gunned down where they stand. Alexei, in his chair, is shot multiple times but moans, still alive. One of the executioners, Peter Ermakov, steps forward, puts his revolver to the boy's ear, and fires. The sound is wet, final. The gunfire ceases as suddenly as it began. The ringing in the killer's ears is replaced by the sound of moaning, gurgling, the slow drip of blood on the felt rug. The smoke is so thick they can barely see. They open the door to let it clear, the night air rushing in, doing little to dispel the smell of cordite and copper. As the haze lifts, the scene is revealed in its horrific detail. Bodies are heaped, tangled. Blood runs in rivulets across the grooved floorboards, soaking into the dark felt. The wall behind is pocked with bullet holes and splattered with tissue. Then, a movement. One of the Grand Duchesses, Maria, perhaps, groans and tries to rise. Another, Anastasia, the vivacious youngest, screams, her hands covering her face. They are still alive. Panic erupts among the killers. Ermakov and others rush forward, using rifle butts and bayonets. The sounds are no longer gunshots, but worse, the thick, wet thuds of metal on flesh and bone. The room falls silent again, save for the heavy breathing of the executioners. Yurovsky, methodical, checks each pulse. 11 bodies. All still. He orders them stripped, their clothes and valuables piled for later burning. The jewels are discovered, the secret revealed. The men mutter in awe and horror at the diamond-studded undergarments, now slick with blood. The butchery is over, but the erasure has only just begun. The silence that followed the final, brutal blows was not peaceful. It was a dense, ringing void, broken only by the ragged breaths of the killers and the slow, steady drip from the carnage. The felt rug, a dark, sodden mass, had done its job imperfectly. The floor was a slick, horrifying map. Yurovsky, his face a mask of grim purpose, began barking orders. The sentimentality was gone, replaced by a logistical nightmare. They had 11 bodies. They had a city swarming with potential informants and white scouts. They had to make them disappear. Completely. The corpses were wrapped in sheets, some taken from the family's own beds upstairs. They were carried out into the courtyard, where a Fiat truck, its engine already grumbling in the pre-dawn dark, waited. The summer night provided little cover. The so-called white nights of the Urals meant a ghostly twilight lingered on the horizon. The men worked with frantic haste, loading the shrouded forms. Blood seeped through the linen, darkening the truck's wooden bed. Yurovsky's initial plan was to take them to an abandoned mine shaft in a deep forest called the Four Brothers, about 15 miles north. The truck, followed by a convoy of horsemen and a smaller car carrying the executioners, lurched into the countryside. The journey was a torment. The roads were little more than cart tracks, muddy and pitted. The truck bogged down repeatedly. As dawn began to lighten the sky, a pale, accusing wash, the truck sank axle deep in a quagmire. This was a crisis. They were exposed, with a truck full of royal corpses, and the day was breaking. Panic threatened to unravel the entire operation. They unloaded the bodies, hiding them in a crude linter by the roadside while they worked to free the vehicle. Locals began to appear, peasants on their way to fields. Curious, they asked what was happening. The guards, nerves frayed, told them they were transporting dead comrades from the front. The lie was thin, but it held. It was here, in this chaotic pause, that the true desecration began. As they transferred the bodies, they realized they were leaking. Fluids dripped from the truck, leaving a trail. The stench was becoming overpowering. Yurovsky knew the mine shaft plan was failing. They needed a new solution, and they needed to lighten their grisly load. He ordered a small, hidden clearing to be found in the forest. A fire was lit. Two of the bodies, those of Alexei and, most historians believe, Maria, were taken aside. They were doused with gasoline and burned on a pyre. The fire spat and hissed, the smell of burning flesh and petrol cutting through the pine-scented air. The bones that remained were shattered with rifle butts and scattered. It was a haphazard, horrifying cremation. For the remaining 9, a new pit was hastily dug. But as they stripped the bodies for burial, more jewels were found, hidden in the corsets, sewn into hatbands, concealed in shoes. The men, now equal parts grave robbers and assassins, pocketed diamonds and pearls, their fingers slick with gore. The bodies were thrown into a shallow grave, and sulfuric acid was poured over them to accelerate decomposition and make them unrecognizable. The acid fizzed and ate at flesh, creating a new, chemical foulness. Then the pit was filled, covered with earth and railroad ties, and the trucks driven back and forth over it to obscure the sight. They returned to the Ipatiev House as the full morning of July 17th dawned. The house itself now demanded purification. The basement room was the epicenter. A special detachment of loyal Latvian riflemen was brought in. They worked with buckets and scrubbing brushes, but the blood had soaked deep into the wooden floorboards and the mortar between the bricks. No amount of washing could remove the stains, nor the smell. Ultimately, they took axes and physically removed the stained floorboards, burning them in the courtyard furnace. They replastered the walls. They told the other guards the family had been evacuated, taken to a secure location. The official announcement from Moscow was delayed, cautious. When it came, it was a masterpiece of omission. It stated that Nicholas Romanov had been executed under sentence of the Ural Soviet due to the imminent threat of white capture. It mentioned nothing of his wife, his son, his daughters. The world was left to assume they were alive, somewhere in Bolshevik custody. This was deliberate. A full revelation of the massacre would be a propaganda gift to the whites and shock the world. Let there be uncertainty, mystery, hope. Let there be deniability. But secrets, especially ones of this magnitude, are porous. Rumors seeped out of Yekaterinburg almost immediately, carried by the very guards who had participated or cleaned up. Whispers of the daughters' jeweled armor, of the bayonets, of the acid and fire, spread through the city, then beyond the Urals, morphing into legend. When white forces finally captured Yekaterinburg a week later, they found the Ipatiev House empty, but they found the clues. The scarred basement, the missing floorboards, the bullet holes in the ceiling and walls, over 100 of them clustered in one terrifying zone. An investigation was launched by white investigator Nikolai Sokolov. He painstakingly pieced together the evidence: the jewels recovered from the mud near the Four Brothers mine, a severed finger believed to be Alexandra's, charred corset stays, buttons from uniforms. He located the shallow grave, but the bodies were gone. The Bolsheviks, realizing the site was discovered, had secretly exhumed and moved them. Sokolov concluded, tragically, that all the remains had been destroyed by fire and acid. The Romanovs, he believed, had been utterly erased from the physical world. For the Bolsheviks, the deed was a brutal necessity, a final break with the old world. For the surviving Romanov relatives scattered across Europe, and for monarchists worldwide, it was a horror beyond comprehension: the murder of innocent children, the extinguishing of a bloodline. The moral shockwaves reverberated globally, painting the new Soviet regime as irredeemably barbaric in the eyes of many. Yet, in the absence of bodies, a potent seed was planted. A seed of doubt. A seed of hope. If there were no bodies, could someone have survived? In the chaos of that basement, in the confusion of the burial in the woods, could a Grand Duchess have crawled away? Could the Tsarevich have been secreted to safety? The very incompetence of the disposal effort gave life to the most persistent ghost story of the 20th century. The world moved on, scarred by war and revolution. The Soviet Union solidified, building its new society atop the bones of the old. The Ipatiev House, that cursed building, was ultimately razed in 1977 on the orders of a local Communist Party secretary named Boris Yeltsin, who later called it a deed of shame. The site became an empty lot, a silent void in the middle of a growing city, as if the earth itself refused to remember what had happened there. But the ghosts of the Romanovs would not rest. They lingered in the collective imagination, fed by the vacuum of certainty. In the decades that followed, a parade of impostors emerged from the shadows of history, each claiming to be a miraculously spared heir. The most famous was Anna Anderson, a fragile, enigmatic woman who surfaced in Berlin in 1920, bearing scars and a haunting knowledge of the Romanov court. For over half a century, she fought to be recognized as Anastasia, captivating the public, inspiring books and films, and dividing the surviving Romanov exiles. Some believed her, seeing in her eyes the ghost of the youngest daughter. Others denounced her as a brilliant, tragic fraud. The mystery of her identity became a tangled thread woven into the larger tapestry of the massacre, a symptom of a profound human need for a different ending. Then, in 1979, the Earth began to give up its secrets. An amateur geologist and crime writer named Alexander Avdenin, who had been obsessed with the case since childhood, acting on clues from Sokolov's notes and decades of his own research, led a small, secret team to a muddy forest road outside Yekaterinburg. Under cover of darkness, they dug near a place known as Pig's Meadow, Porosenkov Log. Their shovels struck not just soil, but history. They unearthed a pit containing skeletal remains. Fearful of the Soviet state's reaction, they reburied the bones, waiting for a time when the truth could be safely told. That time came with the fall of the Soviet Union. In 1991, as the empire built by Lenin crumbled, Avdenin went public. The pit was officially exhumed. Archaeologists and forensic experts from Russia and abroad carefully lifted out 9 skeletons, 5 female, 4 male, all jumbled together in a chaotic grave. The world watched, breathless. The science was meticulous. Skulls were reassembled from fragments. Facial reconstruction was performed, yielding hauntingly familiar visages. Dental records, meticulously kept by the imperial dentist, were compared. But the most conclusive evidence came from a new, powerful tool: DNA analysis. Blood samples from living relatives of the Romanovs, most notably Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, whose grandmother was Tsarina Alexandra's sister, were provided. The mitochondrial DNA, passed unchanged from mother to child, was a perfect match for Alexandra and her daughters. The bones of Nicholas were identified through a match with remains from his brother, exhumed in St. Petersburg. The science was irrefutable. The central mystery was solved. The entire family had died in that basement. But the story had one final, gruesome twist. 2 skeletons were missing from the grave, those of Alexei and one of his sisters, most likely Maria. The historical accounts of the separate, hasty cremation in the woods now took on a chilling credibility. For decades, the partial destruction of those 2 bodies had fueled the survival myths, particularly around Alexei. Now, it was a forensic fact. The search continued. In 2007, almost 90 years to the day after the murders, a second, smaller grave was discovered just 70 meters from the first. Burned bone fragments, teeth, and shards of pottery that had held sulfuric acid were found. DNA tests confirmed they belonged to a boy and a young woman, genetically linked to the Romanovs. Alexei and Maria had been found. The physical evidence now told the full, horrifying tale. The bullets, the bayonets, the acid, the fire, the separate burials, all of it was true. The Bolsheviks' frantic, messy cover-up had finally been decoded by science. In 1998, in a ceremony laden with historical irony, the remains of Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters were interred in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the traditional burial place of Russian emperors. It was a state funeral attended by President Boris Yeltsin, who called the massacre one of the most shameful pages in our history. The Russian Orthodox Church, however, struck a note of controversy. It canonized the Romanovs as passion-bearers, martyrs for their faith. Yet, citing lingering doubts about the completeness of the remains, it initially withheld full recognition of the bones, a reminder that even science could not entirely quell the shadows of doubt and political division. The debate persists, not about the fact of the massacre, but about its meaning and moral weight. Was it a political necessity, a grim but inevitable act to sever Russia from its autocratic past during a brutal civil war? Or was it a monstrous war crime, the cold-blooded murder of a family, including innocent children, that stained a revolution from its very beginning? Historians still grapple with the chain of command, the exact degree of Lenin's personal order, while philosophers ponder the chilling calculus that reduces human beings to problems to be eliminated. Today, on the side of the Ipatiev House stands the Church on the Blood, a magnificent, onion-domed cathedral built in memory of the slain family. Pilgrims and tourists stand in the exact spot of the basement room, now a sunken chapel, its walls lined with icons. They light candles, the flames flickering on golden faces. The air is heavy with incense, a sweet scent meant to cover older, darker smells. But step outside, into the modern city of Yekaterinburg, and you feel the unresolved tension. The church is a monument to martyrdom. Yet, for some, the Romanovs remain symbols of oppressive feudalism. Their deaths a tragic but necessary historical step. Russia itself is caught between these narratives, unable to fully reconcile its imperial past with its revolutionary and Soviet legacy. The massacre in that basement was meant to be an ending, a final period on a 1,000-year story of Tsars. But it was only the beginning of a longer, more complex tale, a tale of evidence and cover-up, of science and faith, of ghosts and bones. It is a crime that refuses to be closed, a wound in history that has scarred but never fully healed. The final, unsettling truth lies not in the brutality of the act itself, but in its enduring, echoing consequence. For in destroying a dynasty, they created something far more powerful and persistent, a mystery that would haunt a century, and a legacy that can be buried, burned, or scattered, but never, ever erased.